Hello! In this video, we're going to talk about what I liked about Kendo. The point of this channel, right, is to talk about how to become a better swordsman. It's not necessarily going to be about, strictly speaking, a better Gumdosa or Kendoka or anything like that, but the idea is just to, take some ideas from maybe some other martial arts, kind of see what they do really well, maybe things they don't do as well, and kind of just find ways you can take things from other martial arts to enrich your own training and your own life. Now obviously, because this is not a Gumdo video, you can tell I'm not in uniform, right? I'm in my streets, and I'm in my office. But let's talk about Kendo a little bit. Just for a little bit of background, I did Kendo for a couple years. I think it maybe like 4 or so years, or maybe more than that, less than that, who knows. But I did that for a couple years. When I was in college, I got to the rank of Nikyu, but then I ultimately left. It wasn't because of the instructor, it was mostly because I graduated and yeah, right? But again, like, I really enjoyed my time there, and there's a lot of like interesting, good things that came from Kendo. Now in the next video, actually, I'm going to talk about things that I didn't, enjoy as much in Kendo. So we're just going to take a little bit pros and cons of this martial art, because it's a very specific martial art, and it's also a martial art that's very, very popular, with good reason. I'm going to take a look at mainly in 2 different flavors, right? So one is going to be the martial art itself, and then the other one's going to be more like the, I'm going to call it social, but like the community aspect, or like the meta aspect of Kendo. Both of those have really good things going on with them, but let's talk about the actual martial art, right? We're swordsmen, we train with swords. There's going to be a lot of overlap and a lot of things we can learn from it. For me, the biggest pro of Kendo is the way it develops your mentality. Now, obviously you can take these ideas to other martial arts, but because Kendo is so specific to it's almost shaped around this idea, at least from the way I interacted with Kendo, your experience may differ. But like, the mentality of Kendo is very, very specific. So one aspect of it is that you're constantly seeking perfection. Right? Now it seems a little bit obvious, right? You always want to perfect your own, techniques and all that fun stuff for any martial art you do, or anything that you want to, hone, right? So whether it's drawing, it's, music production, or I hit the table, right? So like any aspect of your life you can hone for perfection, but Kendo is really interesting because it has a slightly more limited number of techniques, right? There's like only 4 target areas. There's very specific ways you can hit each target area. Like, it's not really, I won't call it open-minded, but it's very, very specific in the way that you must do it. And for that reason, you always, strive for perfection. It's a little bit easier, at least from a Nikyu's perspective, to do that, right? Because like, okay, if I want to hit your wrist, there is the cultist strike, right? I need to do the technique beautifully. I need to have that fumikomi, I need to have the zanchin, I need to have the kiai. You have to have all these aspects all synchronized as one thing, and it's just that one technique you're going to be honing over and over and over. So the idea of always seeking perfection is a little bit more instantiated in Kendo, and I really like that idea that, like, alright, let me just do this technique until it's it's so beautiful, I can execute it without like really any difficulty, and it just is powerful and nice. Another aspect of mentality is the actual contemplation of mortality, if you want to think of it that way, because you are like one-on-one against someone in such a way that's not the same in many other circumstances, right? So Kendo, like, you get struck in the head, right? Like, it's not something like if I'm open hand fighting you and I kind of like back fist you to the head. Again, not to like take away or invalidate ideas of like back fist to head, because those are very painful, but the idea of like seeing an object flying towards your face, and the idea of you're actually in a duel with someone, that makes you think a little bit more about that aspect, right? So you're thinking about like, alright, like, if I'm really taking this seriously, one strike from him could end my life. Let me make sure that I end his or her life more beautifully, right? So there's a lot more of that aspect, which is why, honestly, I do want to see more sparring in Gumdo, right? Because it's easier for you to appreciate that aspect of martial arts, which should be always in your mind when you practice martial arts, or whenever you're in life, right? You should always remember that you are indeed mortal, right? It's important. Yeah, so like having that dual aspect really is a nice way to accentuate that. Similarly, the idea of like the emptiness of mind. Now that's not meant to be like airheaded or anything like that, but the idea of having a very clear mind, right? Like, all right, I need to, strike you down. I can't be thinking about, taxes or something like that while I'm in the middle of this fight. Like when you're in a match, that's the only thing that exists for you in that moment. That's also another thing that you can, again, expand to other aspects of your life, right? So when you're, writing, that is the thing that you're doing. If you're making candles, that's the thing that you're doing. If you're fighting someone, that's the thing that you're doing, right? So like being able to clear your mind and like, obliterate all other ideas except for the one thing on, you have at task is also another beautiful aspect of Kendo that teaches so well. And then last thing, because there's so many aspects of mentality, I could, I'm just going to stick with 4. I usually stay with 3. I don't know why I chose 4. 4, right, is the idea of respect, right? So like, at least in a proper, Kendo match, it's not meant to be like, it's like high school sports where you kind of like, name calling or anything like that. It's like, all right, like you and I are like on equal footing. Like I want to, in theory, right? So it's, the idea of this is a sword fight. I want to end you, as beautifully, etc., etc. But like you could do the same to me. So the idea of like there's a lot more respect between individuals, which is also a cultural aspect of it as well that I also really enjoy. But just the idea of respect and respecting your opponent, respecting the judges, and respecting the place that you're training in, all those aspects are super important to Kendo and are things that you can also think about when you're doing your own training. And for some of the more boring aspects, or like mentality is like the biggest thing that I got from Kendo. Another aspect is simply the physical, right? It is a very cardio-centric martial art, especially if you're younger and you're doing like all the kirakaishi, right? And you're doing like the really long drills, long ki, constant ki, is really, good cardio if you want to think of it that way, and it's really just good for your body so long as you don't damage your feet as you do fumikomi, because that is a relatively common occurrence, but it can also be mitigated if you use bigger muscle groups, etc. That's a whole different thing, but it is also just really good, physically. Right, so like as you do Gumdo, just gonna compare and maybe to a certain extent, like open hand forms as well, you do have periods of downtime pretty consistently, right? So when you're doing a form, you have these defenses. The action of you cutting and all that fun stuff. I was trying to do like 4 over here. There's a little bit of relaxed aspect, if you want to think of it that way, versus when you're in constant, kirakaishi, constant strikes. You're constantly like exerting your body to a much higher degree, at least from my experience, than you do as you go through forms, for instance. So just putting it out there, it is also really good physically for you to train with. And then last thing, at least in terms of the art itself, it is good at what it does. Like for the purpose of Kendo, at least in terms of, again, my interpretation as a non-black belt in Kendo, right? So keep that in mind. What it teaches you is excellent. It's like one of the best martial arts for its purpose. The idea of Kendo, at least for me, again, this differs from many other people. It's like, okay, it's really teaching you mentality, it's teaching you, again, endurance, it's teaching you, as I get into like other things about like respect, etiquette, and stuff like that. It's teaching those things wonderfully. And I'm going to talk about maybe in the next video, like I'm going to kind of like shy away from certain aspects of it, like if you want to extrapolate those to other aspects of fighting and stuff like that. But for what it does, Kendo is probably one of the best things it can be, if that makes sense, right? So in terms of like that mentality, that the life and death aspect, being able to seek perfection and interacting with an opponent and where you're both trying to reach perfection, like Kendo is perfect for that. In the next video, I'm going to talk about, again, other aspects of it that I don't enjoy as much, but again, for what it does, it's excellent. And the second general theme that I want to talk about in Kendo is going to be I'm going to call it social. It's not really social, but kind of like the meta aspect of the martial art. So firstly, the Kendo community is so, like, honestly amazing, right? So again, I was only in it for, again, I think it was 4+ years. I honestly forget. For however long it was, people were always like super respectful. There was a very clear way of interacting with people. Like the grand majority of people that I've talked to in a Kendo tournament, for example, or in my Kendo club, excellent people, and they really try to reinforce each other to make them all better. So I was again very fortunate to have an excellent sensei, and my senpai were also again excellent people who did want to see us Gohai succeed. Right, they actually wanted to see us, become better swordsmen, better kendoka, and not become, terrible people while doing that. So I was very lucky, and I'm assuming, at least from my experience, that in general, Kendo has a really beautiful community where everyone's just trying to prop each other up, and it's just wonderful. Another aspect is the incredibly high standards. Again, this is coming from my very specific path. It might differ from other places, but the standards in at least in the path I was going were incredibly high, and I was although I didn't reach black belt or anything like that, I was pretty darn happy to reach Nikyu because that was a lot of training, and it felt like I actually earned that rank when I actually finally tested and got to that point. So the really high standards. So this is something, and not to make it about me, but for example, if you have a martial art or you run a school or anything like that, where if there are most people testing, for example, and they all of them pass, the grand majority of them pass, even if the standards aren't really, or even if they're not as good as you think, right, that's probably something you should probably shy away from. So for example, when I went to a Kendo test, I think there was I want to say there was 8 or 10 or something like that, people going for 4th Dan, which is a really big deal. And it should be a bigger deal in Gumdo, but it's a whole different aspect, it's a whole different martial art, so I'm not trying to compare it that much. But of the 10, I think only 1 or 2 passed, right? And they, from a second Q's perspective, they all looked amazing, but being able to know all right, the standard is so high, I see wonderful cuts, but it's so great, right? So in general, having those really high standards and really helps in many aspects, right? So that first of all makes you feel when you actually do earn that belt or that rank, you really feel you deserve it. Again, I only got to Nikyu, but I was very happy with how I got there. And likewise, that, again, that just accentuates when you hit a rank, you deserve it. So when you hit 4th degree, that person is amazing. That person is sensei material. So in Kendo, 4th degree means sensei. They are great teachers, or going to be great teachers at that point. So high standards is probably one of the major things I would like to take from Kendo and just add to many other aspects of martial arts and also parts of your own life. Another aspect is simply respect. I know that I sort of touched upon this when you're respecting the opponent, but now I'm kind of getting a little bit more meta art, but respecting your equipment, respecting, right? So for example, whenever we, whenever we train, we obviously, after we train, fold the uniform, make sure it's perfectly folded, and you really need to do that because the hakama are intricate, right? But there's always a lot of respect for the equipment, making sure that you always clean it before you go to the tournament, out of respect for your opponent. You make sure you upkeep your shinai all the time, right? So sanding down the edges in case there's splinters, oiling it, again, every month or so. And again, whenever you enter the dojang, sweeping the floor, putting up the shomen if it's not already fixed there. There's a lot of respect, again, not just to the people, which is obviously the thing I talked about before, but to the equipment, to the room that you're training in. There's just a lot more respect all around, and that's something that I also, again, just enjoy spreading. And the last thing that I enjoy from Kendo is the idea of rank and whether you wear it. So at least from, again, the school that I went to, we didn't. We didn't wear like, oh, I'm like, NICU, I'm gonna have like this special belt or something. Like, oh, I'm no third degree, like I'm gonna wear this. Like, no, like everyone had just normal hakama, keikogi, hakama, bogu, right, and shinai. But you weren't able to kind of tell what the other person was just at a glance. Now again, that might sound really frustrating from a certain perspective, but that gives you a new perspective, right? So that way you're not like automatically judging someone just by looking at like the color of their belt. You're like, okay, like let's engage and I'll kind of gauge, like, and I'll kind of measure your ability on the fly, right? And that seems just a lot more genuine than it is, anything else. So for example, like I've met people who haven't reached black belt, for example, in Gumdo, and they're amazing. Like they have clean cuts, they have great stances, their instructor probably taught them quite well. And I see, high-ranking black belts, I'm not gonna say necessarily in Gumdo, but I see high-ranking black belts either, let's just say on YouTube, just to make things more vague so I don't get in trouble. We see like high-ranking black belts with like, 8 bars or 6 bars or something like that on their belt, and they're bad. Putting it nicely. So like the idea of not wearing rank and just being judged on your ability is really cool, and I really like that. Side note, just because I can, Gumdo to a certain degree does it as well, right? Because when you come master, it just says master so-and-so on your belt, and it doesn't have the bars on the other side. So I actually do like that aspect of Gumdo, but I'm gonna reel it back in because it's about Kendo. But yeah, I really enjoy that aspect of Kendo because it forces you to actually, first of all, treat everyone equally, right? Because like everyone looks the same, at least in terms of like armor and stuff like that. So like, okay, the only way I can maybe gauge is by like superficial stuff, but you definitely know by how you spar. So that's something that I just really enjoy. This was intended to be a nice short video, but as you know, I am very verbose and I talk way too much. But yeah, so like this is just a brief-ish overview of like what I liked about Kendo and my own experience from Kendo, and what, again, ideas you can take from that and add to your own training, and maybe kind of find your own flavor to it, right? But with that, just make sure you keep training, stay safe, stay humble, and take these ideas and let's just say take 3 of them and see how you can encourage them in your own training, and see how it goes, both as you as a teacher and you as a practitioner. So with that, have a good one.